My name is Putty Primer. It's 11/27/2020. I'm being forced to get into a truck with Benjamin and Mikhail.
So as much as you've improved, you missed the mark, you fall short, and you're still a selfish, narcissistic... Shove it!
Sure.
Okay.
I've been drinking my urine daily for 4 years.
Okay.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Today's case, we are covering another twisted cult, and it feels like a while since I have done a cult. And today's cult is also a very recent cult, because back in 2020, a woman called Chloe Driver found herself in the middle of a polygamist cult, where she was married to a man named Brian Joyce, who was also married to 2 other women. So he had 3 wives, and Brian, wow, prepare yourselves for him. He makes my blood boil. He makes me so angry, because he is the evil cult leader from today's case. He was misogynistic, narcissistic, an abuser, and very cunning and manipulative. He would force his followers into very strange practices. For example, drinking their own urine. He was also physically abusive to all of his wives. He completely isolated them from society, and he got them all pregnant, because of course that is cult leader 101, have multiple partners and get them all pregnant. And one of his so-called wives, Chloe Driver, she soon fell into a really bad state. She wanted her husband all to herself. She also became very delusional. She thought that the other 2 wives were out to kill her. And this soon drove Chloe into committing a devastating and terrible act, an unthinkable act involving her very own child. This case is heartbreaking beyond belief. Truly it is. It's not a nice case for me to talk about today, but I have gotten quite a few requests to cover this case because the trial has literally just happened, and I assume some of you were following the trial like I was. So let's get into it. And I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is HelloFresh. And we are just about heading into the very busy holiday season, which means less time in our schedules and more stress. And this is where HelloFresh can fit in perfectly. I have been using their meal service for the longest time now, because with HelloFresh you get delicious recipes delivered right to your door. You never have to worry or stress about what to cook for dinner. You can save all of those endless trips to the grocery store, and you can just pick your meals that you want for the week right from the app. And is it just me, but I love choosing my meals from HelloFresh every single week, because it literally is like you're in a restaurant and you're just picking your meals. And I get so excited when the new menus get released. Is that just me? And there is a different selection of meals every single week, so you will never get bored. All of the ingredients come pre-portioned. They're all separated into their own little bags, and you just put your little brown bag in the cupboard, and then you just pull it out when you want to cook your dinner. And it is just so simple. And each recipe that you choose comes with a recipe card that does have pictures, and it's just super easy to follow along with. And recently I cooked the honey lime glazed burgers, and oh my god, they were so good. Delicious would be an understatement. It is truly a lifesaver, and if you have never tried HelloFresh, I highly recommend it. And right now you can get up to 10 free meals and free shipping on your first box at hellofresh.com with code DanielleKirsty10FM. That's up to 10 free HelloFresh meals and free shipping. Just go to hellofresh.com and use the code DanielleKirsty10FM. And the free meals are applied as a discount on your first box for new subscribers only, and varies by plan. And using that link and my code really does help out this channel, because it lets HelloFresh know that you came from this video. So thank you again to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you guys watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Chloe Driver was born in the year 2000. An exact date of birth is not known, and I believe she grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee with her parents and siblings, although it was really hard to confirm that. And growing up, Chloe's mom has described Chloe as a beautiful young girl. She did gymnastics, she played softball, she was described as a spitfire, she just seemed to know everything, she was extremely intelligent, had a load of friends. And according to Chloe's mom, Chloe had a perfectly happy childhood. However, Chloe does not have the same account of her childhood. Chloe said that her parents were very cold towards her, that her childhood was very unstable, that the family moved around a lot. She never felt like she actually truly had a home anywhere. She struggled a lot with abandonment issues. And when Chloe entered her teenage years, she really went off the rails. She started rebelling against her parents. She stopped trying hard at school. She also started abusing all kinds of substances. She began drinking a lot of alcohol, smoking a lot of marijuana. She also started taking cocaine at a very young age, and she was experimenting with a lot of hard drugs at a very young age. She started running away from home all of the time, getting into relationships with a load of other teenage boys. She would move in with these teenage boys for a few days before returning home. And I couldn't find out any information about her relationships with all of these teenage boys, but I can't imagine that they were healthy. And Chloe just felt like her parents didn't really care about her. They didn't really show her any attention or love, affection. Chloe also started to self-harm when she was a teenager, and she would cover up her scars on her arms with plastic bracelets so her parents wouldn't see. She even attempted to take her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills, until eventually Chloe sought out help from a doctor. She did receive some mental health treatment. She was prescribed antidepressants, although it is said that she never actually took her medication regularly. So she's still incredibly young. Everything that I have just said that she has gone through is before she's even 17 years old. And then when Chloe was 17 years old, she ran away from home again for the final time, and she would never return home. And this is where Chloe's life now takes a significant turn for the worst, because now Chloe has run away. She's only 17 years old, which is just crazy young. She's very vulnerable. She has nowhere to live. She's struggling with substance abuse. She's also struggling with her mental health. She's just got a lot going on right now. She is incredibly vulnerable. And this is now the moment when a 38-year-old man enters the picture, a man named Brian Joyce, who also goes by the name Benjamin. He actually goes by quite a few names, so if you look up anything on this case, you might get confused by how many names he goes by. He goes by Brian, Benjamin. Some people also call him Z, but I'm just going to call him Brian for the sake of this video so we don't get confused. And oh my god, this man is a monster. He is the evil cult leader of today's cult. And just be prepared to get really angry at this man, because my blood has been boiling all week researching this case. So now we're going to look at Brian and his background. He was born in 1979. A date of birth is also not known. I don't even know where he was born or where he grew up. I assume it's somewhere in the US. We literally do not know anything about Brian until 2013, when Brian is already 33 years old. And this is when he gets to the first that we know of many abusive relationships. So the first abusive relationship that we know of is with a woman called Gabriella. Or should I call her a girl at the time? Because when they met, Gabriella was also only 17 years old. That is a pattern with Brian. He likes very young women / teenage girls. He likes finding young teenage girls that are vulnerable, that are easy to manipulate and control. He likes his teenage girls that are just legal. And Brian is 33 years old, so he's literally nearly double Gabriella's age. And Gabriella fell for Brian straight away because he was charming. He was able to put on the charm. He pretended to be this really great, caring guy, someone that would be able to look after Gabriella. He made Gabriella feel special, feel loved. He was just like your typical predator. And things in the relationship moved very quickly. Within just a few months, 17-year-old Gabriella moved in with Brian, and Brian was actually currently living with his parents. So now Gabriella is also living with Brian's parents, and it turns out that Brian already has a long-term girlfriend. This is another very common theme throughout today's case. Brian likes multiple partners, regardless of what his partner wants. And the pre-existing long-term girlfriend was a woman called Jennifer, who Brian had been with for approximately 2 years at this point. Apparently they were also planning on getting engaged. So it was a pretty serious relationship between Brian and his pre-existing girlfriend Jennifer. And now Brian just brings in another girlfriend, i.e. 17-year-old Gabriella. But not too long after Gabriella moves in with Brian and his parents, Brian's prior relationship with Jennifer does fizzle out. So Brian has gone from having 2 girlfriends to now just one, being Gabriella. And after a few months into the relationship, as soon as Brian had his hooks in Gabriella, the relationship turned incredibly abusive. The first thing that Brian did was declare that Gabriella was his wife. And I have no idea what that means. I don't think they were ever officially legally married. It literally just seems like Brian declared Gabriella as his wife, Michael Scott style. So Gabriella is now his apparent wife, and the two continue to live at Brian's parents' house. Brian also worked for some investment group that he set up. However, Gabriella described it more as like an MLM, but Brian thought that he was this like super successful businessman, when in reality he wasn't. It just seemed like he was working for an MLM and not making any money at all. But after setting up this whatever business he's set up, Brian becomes very religious. He starts regurgitating all of this stuff about spirituality to Gabriella. He believed that he was some kind of messiah. He had a higher consciousness than everybody else. He believed that he was above everybody else. You know, typical cult leader. This is when he also changed his birth name from Brian to Benjamin. I think he may have legally changed it, but again, when it comes to Brian, who knows? So he's now going by Benjamin Ben Michael. But again, I'm still just going to call him Brian just for the sake of this video so we don't get too confused. He also tried to indoctrinate Gabriella into his beliefs. He would read her all of these like religious passages all day long, and he did eventually suck Gabriella into his belief system. So now that he really does have his hooks into Gabriella, he now moves on to the next step of being a cult leader 101. He starts to isolate Gabriella from every single person that she knows. He would put limits on who she could talk to, what she could say, how long she could talk to people for, who she could see. She had rules that she had to follow if she was ever out in public. Not that she was ever allowed out in public that often, but she still had to abide by certain rules. And these rules and regulations got more strict over time. In the beginning of the relationship, Gabriella was allowed to do pretty much whatever she wanted, talk to whoever she wanted, and go wherever she wanted. But then Brian started to tag along everywhere with her, monitor everything that she did. And then he started saying, well, you're not allowed to go there. You're not allowed to go there. You're not allowed to speak to this person. He then also took over her social media, monitoring every single thing that she did. And Gabriella used Facebook a lot to keep in touch with her family, but Brian was monitoring everything that she did on there, restricting who she was allowed to talk to, even on social media, who she's only talking to her friends and family. The only person that Gabriella was actually allowed to stay in contact with was her sister. And this definitely has a very sinister meaning, which we will get onto in a minute. But even Gabriella's contact with her sister was heavily monitored. Whenever Gabriella would talk to her sister on the phone, she had to put the phone on speaker. And Brian was right there in the room, listening to the whole conversation, coaching Gabriella on what she was allowed to say, what questions she was allowed to respond to. Gabriella was also only allowed to message her sister on Facebook Messenger, but most of the time it was actually Brian messaging her sister on Gabriella's behalf, because Brian would just snatch her phone off her and type a reply pretending to be Gabriella. He also started to confiscate Gabriella's phone so she would never be able to contact anyone behind his back. So that is how the abuse started. But as you can probably guess, it didn't take long for the abuse to become physical. Because if Gabriella ever did anything wrong, if she ever went against any of the rules that he had imposed on her, he would beat her. He was a very angry, violent man. He would lash out, slap her across the face. He would kick her, punch her. His abuse went to the extreme, verging on torturing Gabriella. There was one time where he took a load of duct tape and he taped up Gabriella's torso incredibly tight. Like, I mean, to the point where Gabriella basically couldn't breathe, which is just so sadistic. And he left Gabriella like this with this incredibly tight duct tape around her torso. Gabriella is unable to breathe and Brian just beat her up. He was repeatedly punching her in the face whilst she was literally suffocating under all of that duct tape. And she was left black and blue. There was also times when he would go on crazy rants for hours at Gabriella. Sometimes he would speak in tongues. He was saying all sorts of vile things to Gabriella. There was even a time where he dragged Gabriella down to the basement. He tied her up, held a machete to her throat, and told her in graphic detail how he was going to kill her. He was telling her that he would be able to get away with it, that Gabriella had no one in her life that would come looking for her. And I just want to point out that Brian and Gabriella, they're still living with Brian's parents. So he's doing this in the basement with his parents upstairs. And of course he was making a lot of noise doing this. So Brian's dad went down to the basement to see what was going on. And guess what? Brian took his own dad hostage as well. But then Brian's mom, just a few moments later, wanted to investigate where her husband was, and then Brian took his mom hostage as well. So Brian now is taking his mom, dad, and Gabriella hostage with a knife, and he kept them all tied up in the basement for hours. And I don't know what his plan was here. Like, I don't know what his end game was for this, but eventually he does let all three go. None of them contact the police as far as I'm aware. So no charges were ever brought against Brian for taking his mom, dad, and Gabriella, his so-called wife, hostage. So this just keeps going on and on. Gabriella is stuck in this incredibly abusive relationship. She's still only 17 years old. Obviously she does turn 18. And then eventually Brian decides that he's bored with Gabriella and he now wants a second wife. And Gabriella is like, no, I'm not okay with that. I do not want another person in this relationship. So Brian told Gabriella, okay, if you want to be my exclusive wife, you have to get pregnant in the next 12 months. That is his one condition. If Gabriella wants to remain his sole exclusive wife, she has to get pregnant in the next 12 months. I just don't have any words. He is crazy. He's blackmailing Gabriella, who's incredibly vulnerable, to get pregnant. Otherwise, he will get a second wife. And Gabriella was not ready to have a child. She's now currently 18 years old. Brian is obviously in his 30s. But Gabriella knew that Brian would follow through with his threats. Gabriella knew that if she didn't agree, he would get a second wife. And Gabriella felt incredibly trapped in this relationship. And she agreed to his demands. And Gabriella did fall pregnant in the 12-month window. So whilst Gabriella is pregnant, Brian does lay off the physical abuse because, you know, he's a good man. It's like, wow, does he want a medal? He didn't lay off it though completely. There was still a time when Gabriella was pregnant where he wrapped his hands around her throat and tried to choke her whilst she was pregnant. Heavily pregnant. And then also whilst Gabriella is pregnant, Brian now thinks that it is the perfect time for the couple to now live a nomadic lifestyle for the first time whilst Gabriella is heavily pregnant. So now that is what they do. Brian and Gabriella now travel all around the country in a van. They sleep on various different couches. They are never in one place too long, which would not be easy on Gabriella at all because she is heavily pregnant. It was a massive struggle for her. Brian also forbid Gabriella from using traditional medicine. She wasn't allowed to visit a doctor or a hospital, and she's pregnant because this was all a part of Brian's belief system. He didn't believe in medicine. So Gabriella was never allowed to go to the hospital for a checkup on her baby. However, just before the birth, Brian and Gabriella did travel back to Brian's parents' home, which I don't know why they didn't just stay there whilst she was pregnant. I mean, that would have been so much easier for her, but Brian doesn't care about that, does he? And I think in the end, Brian did allow Gabriella to have the baby in a hospital. There were no complications and Gabriella gave birth to a healthy baby girl. And then as soon as their daughter was born, they were forced back on the road again to live in this van, live a nomadic lifestyle. However, after the birth of their daughter, something in Gabriella changed because she now no longer has to only worry about herself. She now has to worry about her daughter. She wanted to protect her daughter at all cost, make sure that no harm came to her. And having her daughter actually gave Gabriella more confidence. And she started to look for an escape route out of the relationship with Brian. But it wasn't easy for Gabriella because she was isolated from everyone. She basically had no contact with any friends or family apart from brief contact with her sister. But even any contact that she ever had, it was heavily monitored by Brian. She had no money. She was always 24/7 with Brian. So escaping for Gabriella was no easy feat. They were also homeless. They were obviously living out of this van. Their daughter was exclusively breastfeeding, so the baby was fine. However, Gabriella was barely eating. She was incredibly malnourished, so she didn't even have the energy to try and escape. So Gabriella, even though she really wants to get out of this relationship, she wants to escape, she's feeling more trapped than ever. And then just after the baby was born, something very significant happens because Brian meets another 17-year-old girl called Chloe Driver, who is the main focus of today's case. Brian met Chloe whilst him and Gabriella are living out of the van on the road with their newborn baby. So Chloe and Gabriella, they overlap. And this is when Brian starts to groom Chloe, just like he did with Gabriella when she was 17 years old. So Brian is currently now grooming a 17-year-old girl who he wants to eventually become his wife, whilst Gabriella is trying everything in her power to escape. And Chloe basically moved in with the family in the van on the road because Chloe at the time was also incredibly vulnerable because she was homeless. Because that's Brian's perfect victim, isn't it? Anybody that is young enough and vulnerable. So Brian now has his so-called wife Gabriella and his new girlfriend Chloe. Brian is living the life that he always wanted. So the three of them, along with the baby, now travel the country living out of this van. However, in early 2017, just a few months after the baby was born, Brian and Gabriella were currently crashing at one of Brian's friends' homes. And this is when something very significant happens because Gabriella's sister, Nicole, came to stay with them. Now, Gabriella was pretty much only allowed contact with her sister, even though it was heavily monitored by Brian. And I said that there was a sinister reason behind this. And the reason why I think Brian allowed Gabriella to stay in contact with her sister was because Brian wanted to also make a move on Gabriella's sister. Yep, Brian wanted to make Nicole a girlfriend as well / wife, which is just sick and disgusting that Brian wanted the two sisters at the same time. So when Nicole is staying with Brian and Gabriella, Brian is being incredibly creepy. He's being very flirtatious with Nicole, the sister. He's making his moves. And Gabriella has said that this was the straw that broke the camel's back. She did not want her sister sucked into this crazy world. She didn't want her sister to become another wife of Brian, to become another victim of Brian, to be in this incredibly abusive situation, this cult-like environment. So now Gabriella, more than ever, was determined to escape, to get herself away from Brian, to get her daughter away from Brian, but also now get her sister Nicole away from Brian. And she actually did manage to flee. She actually fled to a farm in Florida where she was hiding out for about a month. But then Brian managed to track her down and drag her back. And after returning, Gabriella just kept saying that she wanted to leave Brian. She didn't want to be there anymore. But Brian just kept threatening her that he would take sole custody of their daughter away from her if she ever left. And Gabriella truly believed that he was capable of doing this. So for the time being, Gabriella stayed in this abusive relationship. But one day she just couldn't take it anymore and she called up her dad and she asked him for help. And this is when she finally managed to escape Brian for the final time after being trapped in that relationship for about 4 years. And as you can imagine, this was not the end of the relationship between Gabriella and Brian, because Brian was not happy at all that Gabriella managed to escape. So he would continue threatening her for years to come. He would try and legally gain sole custody of their child time and time again. He just made her life a living nightmare. But it seems like after Brian had met Chloe, Chloe now seemed to get more of his attention, which allowed Gabriella to escape relatively unharmed from Brian. However, sadly for Chloe, this is now where things will go very quickly downhill for her. And this is now where we return to Chloe Driver, who is obviously the main focus of today's case. Because Brian and Chloe, they're pretty much dating now. And if you remember, Chloe is only 17 years old. She has literally only just left home. And after Gabriella escaped, it's now just Brian and Chloe living out of that van, traveling across the country. And now that Brian has Chloe completely to himself, he now starts to really manipulate her. He was incredibly charming in the beginning of their relationship, reeling her in, getting his hooks in, making Chloe feel like no one in the world would love her the way Brian did, that Chloe was loved, that she was special. Brian came across as very charming, intelligent, engaging, and Chloe quickly fell for him. Again, she was incredibly vulnerable, struggling with her mental health, her age. She's also homeless. Chloe felt like her parents didn't didn't care about her. Her parents had abandoned her. Chloe felt like her whole world was now Brian. And Brian was this older man that was showing her interest. He was showing her love and attention that Chloe had felt like she had never received before. And Chloe just became wrapped up completely in Brian's world. She trusted Brian. She felt protected for the first time, safe. And as soon as that happened, as soon as Chloe let her guard down, everything changed. Because Brian showed his true colours towards Chloe, the same way he did to Gabriella. He literally does the same thing. He starts to isolate Chloe from the few people in her life. He stopped Chloe from even making contact with her family, with her friends, with anyone Chloe even remotely cared about. And any contact that she did have with people was heavily monitored. And then after that had been going on for a while, Brian then became physically abusive. It's literally just the same relationship that he had with Gabriella, but just now with Chloe. And once again, Brian declared Chloe his wife. Again, I don't think they ever legally got married. He just goes around declaring people his wife. Although I will say in the media, some sources do refer to them as husband and wife. So again, I don't know. And about a year into their relationship, this is when Brian decides that he's no longer content with just Chloe. I mean, his dream is to have multiple wives. And so far that we know of, he's never actually achieved that. Well, now he does. And this is where things start to get very cult-like indeed. Because Brian now goes on to meet two more women, Jessica and Sarah. Now, Jessica was 30 years old, so she's closer in age to Brian, which is actually quite shocking because Brian goes for very young women/teenagers. However, Sarah is 20 years old, so Sarah is his typical victim. And it's not too clear how he met Jessica and Sarah and how their relationships began. But considering we know how Gabriella and Chloe's relationship with Brian started, I don't think it's too far-fetched to just assume that Brian manipulated and groomed both Sarah and Jessica and managed to convince them to join him in his cult and become his wives. And it wasn't too long after Brian met Sarah and Jessica that they both joined him and Chloe on the road in this van. So they're now all living out of this van and Brian is with these three women. It's definitely a very strange situation. So when they're all living in this van, Brian now declares Sarah and Jessica as his wives. So Brian is now apparently in a polygamous marriage. And polygamy, if you are not aware, is the practice of being married to more than one person at the same time. And again, I have no idea if any of these marriages are legal, but considering polygamy is illegal in the US, I don't think he was married to any of them legally. However, that didn't stop Brian from introducing the three women as his wives to every single person he met. He made out to everyone that it was official, and he was definitely all high and mighty about it. He definitely thought that he was above others because he had multiple wives. And he drafted up his very own contracts for his three wives. And in the contract, it stated about how they should act, what was expected of them out of the relationship, and if they went against the contract, they would be severely punished. And he gave his three wives new names, and I have read that these were Hebrew names. So Chloe was known as Kuani, Jessica was known as Anna Gamani, and Sarah would be known as Sheelig. This is also when Brian started to be referred to as Z. And as the marriages moved forward, I have no idea what life was like for Sarah and Jessica. I did find Brian's Instagram account, which you can go and look at right now if you want to. His Instagram is public. And of course, I went through every single photo. And you can see on Brian's Instagram account, he's got some pictures with Jessica, with Sarah, with Chloe. He has his arms around multiple wives at the same time. And according to one of Brian's friends at the time, they said that Brian's relationship with all of his three wives was very healthy. And it was very beautiful. And I'm just like, no, I don't believe it. I do not believe it. He is an abusive predator and he doesn't know how to have a healthy relationship. Apparently the three wives, they all got along. They never argued. There was never any jealousy. But that is just according to Brian's friend, who is obviously very biased. Because speaking of Brian's friend, we're about to meet him. And I'm laughing because he makes my blood boil just as much as Brian. Because this friend, his name is Jason. He is a piece of work himself. Now, I think Brian and Jason, they had a common interest, of being complete arseholes. But apart from that, they had apparently a common interest in their investment business, or should I say MLM, and the two of them became close friends because they both have a god complex. They both think they are superior to others. They both think that women are inferior, and quite clearly they bonded over this. And when they first started to become close friends, Brian started spouting all of his strange beliefs to Jason, and Jason was lapping it all up. Brian told Jason that he was the chosen one. Chosen to do what? I do not know, but apparently Brian was the chosen one. And Brian said to Jason that if Jason followed him, he could lead him to much greater things. So Brian invited Jason to come and live with him and his 3 wives. So now the cult essentially is 5 people. They're all living in this van. They're all traveling. They're living this nomadic lifestyle. They are living basically off the grid, outside of society, and they do things in their own spiritual way. And this is truly when the cult really is a full-on cult now. And you might be thinking, is this actually a cult? Because it's only 5 people. It's only 5 people living out of a van. Like, is this actually a cult? Well, there's not actually a strict definition of what a cult is. There are many different definitions of what a cult is. One definition is that a cult is a social group that have unusual, often extreme spiritual or religious beliefs, which is definitely going on in today's case. Another definition is that a cult is an organized group, usually headed by one powerful leader whose purpose is to dominate their followers through psychological abuse, manipulation, and control. Again, that is definitely going on in today's case. So what were the beliefs that Brian had, and what were the beliefs that he spouted to his followers that they had to believe as well? Well, first of all, Brian dictated the diet of his followers. He believed that his followers should be strict vegans. The group also rejected modern medicine. We already know that Gabriella was not allowed to go to the doctors when she was pregnant. The cult believed that they had to leave their bodies to heal on their own, regardless of what was wrong with them. But it goes further than that, because none of the women are ever allowed to go to the doctor. And I only read that it was the women that weren't allowed to go to the doctor. So I'm not entirely sure if Brian and Jason are allowed to go to the doctors. On top of all of this, Brian also enforced sensory deprivation practices, where he would basically shut his followers. Sometimes it was one at a time, sometimes it was a couple, but he would shut his followers in a room or in the van, and he would block out all light, all sound, and his followers, whoever it was, had to stay in this darkened, blacked out room for hours and meditate. They weren't allowed out. They didn't have access to a bathroom. And finally, Brian told all of his cult members that they had to drink their own urine. Yeah, because apparently it has incredible health benefits.
Sure.
Okay.
I've been drinking my urine daily for 4 years.
Okay.
And there was no exceptions to this. They all had to do it. How often they had to do it, I do not know, but once is too much. And then Brian also believed that a man should have as many wives as they want. Of course, cult leader 101. And obviously Brian has 3 wives at the time. He wants more than 3, but at this time he only has 3. And Jason, he's also allowed to have multiple wives, but he currently has 0 because the other 3 women in the cult are obviously married to the leader. And Brian and Jason are incredibly misogynistic. I'm talking Andrew Tate level misogynistic. I've actually seen a video of Brian. He's actually talking on YouTube with Jason, and he did give me Andrew Tate vibes.
Back at your own fucking eyes, motherfucker, because I see you. I've been there looking at you. Yeah, you can figure out what that one means. I took your advice. I showed up, I stood there, and you know what happened? Ain't shit happened. Because you're talk, bro.
But because Brian and Jason, they see women as inferior. They see women as below men, and they should be treated as such. So they started imposing their views and expectations on the 3 wives in the cult. And just to give you an idea of their views on women, I did find a few Facebook posts from Jason, which basically just sums up who they are as people. And I'm really sorry right now because you're all going to get very, very angry. Women are psychologically inferior to men. There are some exceptions, but most all women should be kept in cages. They only have the ability to destroy everything in this world that men have built, unless commanded how to be absent in their inherent nature, which may be described as violent, emotionally chaotic, deceptive, desperate for, probably undeserved, validation, narcissistic, and in brackets, evil. Change my mind. Making a baby is literally the only thing a woman can do that a man cannot do. Let's make a list of the things that a man can do that a woman cannot. Be accountable. I am sorry. What? Consistently make logical decisions from paradigms that are not rooted in emotionally based, flawed reasoning. Properly lead a group of individuals, a community. Provide safety and protection for a family. Think individually. Be defiant of herd mentality. And I've just got to pause for a second there because he's literally describing himself. He is literally following Brian. He is not thinking for himself. He is following the crowd, i.e. Brian. So he is unable to think individually.
I've been drinking my urine daily for 4 years.
Okay. And then the last point that men can only do, that women cannot, and that is be capable of absolute honesty. I am shell-shocked. Like, truly, I cannot believe that there are actually people in the world that think like this. It makes me lose faith in humanity when I read things like this. I really am speechless. I cannot believe that he describes women as narcissistic. And of course there's narcissistic women, but this is coming from a narcissistic man. It's like pot kettle black. Those were obviously Jason's words on Facebook, but Brian thinks the same. And because they see women like this, they treat the 3 wives in the cult like this. They completely oppress them. They told all 3 women that they were not allowed to have an opinion. They were not allowed to make any decisions for the group. They just had to do as they were told. The group believed in traditional, old-fashioned gender roles. So the women had to do all of the cooking and the cleaning, and the men had to make the really big decisions. And you've got to be aware here that this group of people, they're literally doing nothing. So I don't know what big decisions Jason and Brian are having to make. Literally the only decisions they are making is where to drive to next in their van. And Jason has also said that men are better at making decisions, important decisions, because men can regulate their emotions where women can't. Jason has also said that all women want to do was, quote, run and laugh and be silly on the beach, while he and Brian discussed important things like quantum physics. Really? Really? Why are they discussing quantum physics for starters? They really do think that they are God's gift to this world. They think they are so intelligent. And Jason and Brian really do think that women are incapable of discussing topics like quantum physics, as if women in science don't exist. And when Jason has been asked about what women would think about his views, he more or less said that it's not their role to have an opinion on what I think. Wow, Jason, I've got news for you, because I have an opinion on what you think. And it's a load of bullshit. Women are just as capable as men. Like I said, I've watched a video of Jason and Brian on YouTube. That video is 2 hours long, and no, I did not put myself through those 2 hours. I could not do that to myself. But you can just tell, even by watching small snippets of that video, that they have got the biggest egos known to man. They truly think that they are so intelligent, they have such a God complex.
And the slander that you've dumped upon humanity simply by existing in rebellion against the throne of heaven for as long as you have, that on this level, you just haven't figured out because you're too dumb, son, and you're fucking ignorant, and you're an ignorant piece of shit who intends to cause satanic violence upon humanity. So as much as you've improved, you missed the mark, you fall short, and you're still a selfish, narcissistic, solipsistic piece of shit. Shove it! And take your own tonality, take it and put it up your anus until it comes out your mouth.
And I will insert some clips from that video on YouTube of Brian and Jason talking, but don't worry, I won't put too much in because I don't want to rot all of your brains.
Even on like the direct equation of what is masculinity, like the application of the masculinity algorithm to your life and work.
So that is what life was like inside this incredibly misogynistic cult. These 3 women are under the control of 2 incredibly misogynistic, narcissistic men. We obviously know Brian is an abuser. We don't know if Jason was physically abusive. So just to go on more of a rant about how bad Jason is as a person, because I'm not done with him yet, Jason now goes on to cyberstalk a load of other women, obviously outside of the cult. So at some point in 2017, so this is before Jason joined the cult and before the cult even existed really, Jason ended up going to Coachella with a friend of a friend, and he started hitting on college girls that were a lot younger than him. And these college girls at Coachella were trying to distance themselves away from Jason because he was being a creep. And they all turned him down because Jason did try and make a move on these college girls. But this really angered Jason. So he managed to find them on social media, and he would go on to stalk them, threaten them, blackmail them for years. He would turn up at their college campuses and he would threaten to have sex with them. So he was basically threatening to rape them. And these college girls would constantly turn him down, constantly try and avoid him. They would block him on social media, but Jason always managed to track them down. He then tracked down the families of these college girls and he started threatening the families of these girls as well. And I have got some screenshots of the threatening messages that he was sending to them all. And it truly is terrifying. Jason is unhinged. He was sending the families death threats. This was serious stalking and harassment. He would say things like, "You effed up, you rude little brat, and now you're going to be held accountable and punished like you deserve. There's nothing that anyone can do about it. Get ready for forgiveness." He would also say crazy things like, "Your father is going to die for raping my wives when they are little girls. More importantly, this is what you get for not having effing manners. People you know will be dead before Bonnaroo." And in one extreme message, Jason also threatened to sexually assault an underage girl who was a family member of one of these college girls. And he said things like, "If so-and-so is not a virgin for me like she's supposed to be before you got in my way, then so-and-so is going to die too. You better still have your hymen intact for me like it's supposed to be before I got blocked by your pitiful mother. I'm on my way. You'll be easy to find. See you soon." And these were the kinds of messages that Jason was sending these college girls and the college girls' families regularly. He was threatening to rape an underage girl and threatening to take her virginity. Like, these are serious threats. This man is an absolute monster. He is just as much of a monster as Brian. They are both as bad as each other in my eyes. And this stalking and harassment went on for years. And these college girls, their families, they did go to the police about this, but nothing was really ever done. These messages were not taken seriously. And I'm just like, how can you not take these messages seriously? They have been going on for years and he's literally sending death threats. However, there will eventually be consequences for these messages, which we will get back to later. So the cult goes on like this for approximately another year, and then something very significant happens because Chloe is the first of the wives to fall pregnant. And if you remember, I said in the intro, something devastating and heartbreaking happens with Chloe and her baby. Well, this is where it all starts to unfold because Chloe fell pregnant at some point in 2018. And I think this had been Brian's dream. He intended on getting all three of his wives pregnant. He believed that it would make him have some kind of claim over his wives, like he would own them. And just like with Gabriella, Chloe was not allowed to go to the doctors, the hospital, no checkups, nothing. Nothing to do with modern medicine at all. She had to go through her entire pregnancy with no medical intervention. And 9 months later, Chloe gave birth and she was forbidden from going to the hospital. So Chloe had to give birth at just a random house that they were currently crashing in. And thankfully, it was a smooth birth. Thankfully, nothing went wrong. And she went on to give birth to a baby girl called Hannah Nicole Driver. And after Chloe had given birth to Hannah, Chloe fell in love with her little baby girl. She adored her, would do anything for her. And Chloe has been described as an amazing, attentive, loving mother. And just like Gabriella before her, having a baby completely changed Chloe's outlook on life because she was now responsible for her little baby girl, keeping her safe. So this meant that Chloe started to question a lot of the damaging and abusive views and behavior of her husband Brian, of the group. She didn't want her little baby girl Hannah exposed to all of that. And this is where, for the first time, Chloe started to struggle at being a part of this cult. So the first thing that Chloe really struggled with was the fact that she was not allowed to go to the doctors or hospital or anything. And because she gave birth to Hannah in just a random house, that meant that Hannah, she didn't even have a birth certificate. She was completely off grid. She was not in the system. She had no authority or anything aware of her there to protect her. And this concerned Chloe a lot because Hannah, the baby, she basically doesn't exist. And Chloe started to think, is my baby girl ever going to have a normal life? And because Chloe was having these thoughts, because she was questioning the group, because she was questioning her husband, she started to become very isolated from the group. She didn't speak to her husband Brian as much. She stopped interacting with the other wives. She stayed away from Jason. And because of this, Chloe started to be punished severely. Brian was now severely abusing Chloe, both physically and emotionally. He made Chloe feel like she had absolutely no one, that she could never escape this cult, that she would never be able to live independently. He probably threatened to take custody of Hannah as well, which is what he did to Gabriella. Chloe was now also forbidden from interacting with anyone else from society. She was not allowed to talk to anyone outside of the group. She wasn't even allowed to wave at anyone or say hello. She was not allowed to do anything. She wasn't allowed to get a job. In fact, she'd only actually ever had one job, and that only lasted 2 weeks, and that was only to benefit Brian in the first place. But Chloe was also not allowed to get a car. She wasn't even allowed to attempt to get a driver's license. She wasn't allowed to visit the grocery store. The other wives did those things now. And Chloe used to be able to do those things, but those privileges had been taken away because she was distancing herself from the group. She was barely able to use her phone, and even when she did use her phone, it was under strict supervision. The only time Chloe was ever allowed to talk to anyone outside of the group was when she was out recruiting new members for the cult, because Brian wanted more wives. So his current 3 wives used to have to go out and look for more wives for Brian. So that is the only time Chloe was ever allowed to talk to anybody. And their attempts at recruiting more wives always failed, by the way. And as time went by, things just kept getting worse and worse for Chloe. Her mental health was really suffering with the isolation that she was being put through. And the more her mental health went downhill, the more Brian punished her for it. Chloe was forced to undergo what Brian called dark therapy, where she was confined to a blacked out room for hours on end. Basically kept in the dark with no sound, nothing. Her senses were completely deprived. She was not allowed access to a bathroom. She had to urinate on herself. But then this dark therapy only made Chloe's mental health worse, and it was just a cycle. And Chloe started displaying more and more erratic behavior. She started suffering a lot of delusions. She kept going in and out of what was real and what was a fantasy in her head. She really was checking out. She would also go into violent outbursts and attack the other members of the group. It is said that she would completely lose it. She would just start shaking, and the look in her eyes, it was like she was just completely absent. And she just kept screaming the same things over and over again. And a lot of things that she was screaming were to do with her child, Hannah. She just kept screaming over and over again, I need to protect the baby. And then she would attack the other 2 wives. And it was kind of like she thought the other 2 wives wanted to harm her child. And Brian and Jason had to restrain her constantly. And then when the group would ask Chloe about these outbursts, she would say that she doesn't remember a thing. And obviously because the group do not believe in doctors or anything like that, Chloe never sought help, and she is clearly struggling right now. Instead, Brian self-prescribed her CBD oil, but that actually just made Chloe worse. It made her suffer from extreme paranoia. And the fact that she's already paranoid, it just made everything worse. So now we get to the summer of 2020, and we are getting closer and closer to the terrible events of today's case. This is when Chloe actually pays a visit to her mother, which is a rarity, given that Brian keeps her completely isolated. And when Chloe went to visit her mom, she looked in a terrible state. She had lost a ton of weight. She was walking around in a zombie-like state, and she had a huge black eye. It is very obvious right now that she is struggling, that she's going through something. And this is the first time that Chloe's mom thought to herself, oh my God, my daughter might be in an abusive relationship. And this is 3 years into the relationship between Chloe and Brian. So that just tells you how little Chloe's mom actually sees Chloe. The fact that she's now only just thinking that after 3 years when it has been abusive since day one. And after that visit to her mom, Chloe's mom tried desperately to get Chloe away from Brian, but Chloe said no. And things just continue on the way they are. They actually just get worse. And then after this visit to her mom, Chloe now realizes that she really doesn't want to be a part of this cult anymore. And she makes multiple attempts to leave. I feel like I'm literally just talking about the same case. I feel like I'm just talking about Gabriella all over again because it's literally the same. At this point, the group was staying with one of Brian's friends in an apartment, and multiple times Chloe just ran out of the front door with baby Hannah trying to escape. But every single time Brian or Jason, or the both of them together, they would just go after her and drag her back. And when Brian would drag Chloe back, he threatened to take sole custody of their daughter if she tried to escape again. And then in November of 2020, Chloe makes one final attempt to escape. This time Chloe escaped. She ran out into the middle of the road and she was screaming, and a woman that was driving pulled over to see if she could help Chloe. And this was a woman called Sandra Torres. She was a completely innocent passerby. She literally just saw a woman who was quite clearly distressed, screaming for help, and she pulled over to help this woman. So Chloe started saying to Sandra, very distressed, that she needed help, that this woman needed to help Chloe and her baby. Did Sandra have a phone? She needs to call her mom or the police. She just needs to get out of this situation that she is in. But then Brian and Jason pull up in a car next to them, and they try and force Chloe into Brian's car. Now Sandra could see that Chloe was really distressed. She did not want to get in the car, and it probably looked like a kidnapping to someone that doesn't know the situation, which it basically is a kidnapping. So Sandra was trying to intervene, and Jason just walked up to her and punched her in the face. I just can't believe it. He just walked right up to her, punched her. He punched her so hard as well. You can see photos of her injuries online. She has a massive black eye. She also broke her eye socket. She had to go see a bone specialist to see if she would need surgery. Like, this was a serious injury. And she was just a completely innocent passerby trying to help Chloe. So after Jason punches Sandra, they force Chloe into the vehicle and they drive off. And as far as I'm aware, Jason didn't face any charges for the assault on Sandra. And after this incident, Chloe's mental health took a nosedive. Her paranoia was getting out of control. She believed that everyone had turned against her. She filmed a video on her phone where she talked about being held captive by Brian, that he is keeping her daughter away from her, and that she doesn't even know where she is.
My name is Chloe Driver. It's 11/27/2020. I am being forced to get into a truck with Benjamin Kyle or Ryan Joyce to see my daughter again because he has kept her away from me. I do not know where she is, and he won't tell me anything. He's kept her with people that I don't really know well, and I don't know what's going on with her, and I'm being forced to get in the car and go with him to be able to see her, and I don't even know if I'm actually going straight to her. But I'm doing whatever I think I can to get to her. Her name is Hannah Nicole.
Now, Chloe also started to believe that she could read the minds of other people and that she was learning all of their secrets. She became convinced that her husband Brian and the other 2 wives, Jessica and Sarah, wanted to harm her, that they wanted to kill her, and that they were planning on murdering both Chloe and her baby Hannah. She also believed that they were performing black magic against her, and she knew all of this because she was reading their mind. She also became really paranoid that she was living a life of sin. She believed that she was living in sin because she was married to a man that was also married to 2 other women. She believed that this would be against God's wishes. She started making internet searches like, what does the Bible say about having more than one wife? And can God forgive me for being with a married man? She also believed that she was passing the sin that she was living in onto her daughter through breastfeeding. She thought that her daughter was, quote, downloading her sin through breastfeeding. Chloe's brother also somehow got shot around this time, and Chloe believed that she was responsible for that she was being punished because she was living a life of sin. And obviously her brother being shot had nothing to do with Chloe, but this did not help her at all. Chloe also started telling the group very distressing stories about her childhood. She said that she was sexually abused by her brothers when she was 9 years old. She also said that her older brother was a drug dealer and that Chloe was doing cocaine regularly from the age of 10. And we obviously do know that Chloe took hard drugs when she was young, so I don't know if this is true or not. She also said that when she was 11 years old, she was forced to have sex with her brother's older friends. And she also said that her parents abused her as a child and kept her locked in a cupboard. She also would say things like her brother's penises were so small that it wasn't actually that bad being assaulted by them. And she would say these stories and she would go into very graphic detail that no one was expecting. And we don't know if any of these stories are true, because obviously she is suffering with paranoia and delusions. But obviously we do know that she had a very tough childhood. She took hard drugs. She felt like she was abandoned by her parents. So we just don't know if any of these stories are true or not. But regardless, it is clear to everyone that Chloe is struggling. She needs help right now. And in any normal circumstances, she would have gone to a doctor. They would have diagnosed her with something. They would have offered her help, whether that was medication or therapy or just something. But because she is a part of a group that doesn't believe in doctors, that doesn't believe in modern medication, Chloe is just suffering with no help. And then just as November 2020 was about to end, this is when Chloe's downfall reaches a climax. Because Chloe started telling Brian that she no longer wanted to be with him and his 2 other wives. Chloe came first, and Chloe wanted to be the only wife. She wanted it to just be her, Brian, and their baby Hannah. She didn't want Jason, and she didn't want the 2 other wives around. Because Chloe believed that the other 2 wives especially were out to kill her and her baby, and that Brian needed to get rid of them. But no matter how much Chloe begged, Brian refused, because obviously this is what he wants. He wants multiple wives, so why is he going to get rid of the other 2? And this is when Chloe's delusion started really getting out of control now. She actually started believing that everything around her was fake. She thought that everyone was living in hell, and she thought that everyone around her were actors in like a movie, and that you could just rewind the movie that we're all living in and that no one actually dies. She believed that photographs could download her back to the time when the photograph was taken. Again, she started making very troubling searches on the internet. For example, she was searching for killing someone to save them, killing because the world is fake. She also searched up how to snap a neck, which took her to a website that detailed quite graphically how much force is needed to snap someone's neck. And this is when Chloe started to have incredibly horrific and distressing thoughts that the only way that she would be able to save herself and her baby from the world and from the cult-like group that she was living in was to take her own life, but also take the life of her babies. And sadly, this is now where we get to the incredibly tragic events of today's case. And I do have to give a huge warning right now, because what I am about to say is incredibly traumatic. It's not going to be easy to listen to, because on the 8th of December 2020, Chloe is already in an incredibly fragile state. And on this day, Chloe was attempting to change baby Hannah. And she turned to her so-called husband, Brian, and said that she needed something to change Chloe into. And Brian just picked up a dirty shirt off of the floor and threw it at Chloe and the baby, as if they were absolutely nothing. Just threw a dirty shirt at them. And in this exact moment, Chloe felt completely unworthy of life. And after months of paranoia, delusions, it was this one moment that pushed her over the edge. And it pushed her into doing something absolutely unthinkable and horrific. Because Chloe went straight to the kitchen. She picked up a knife from the butcher's block. She picked up her 13-month-old baby girl, Hannah, and she ran to a nearby bedroom and she locked herself and her baby in the room. And she now drove that knife into her own baby, Hannah. She drove the knife into her own baby multiple times in the neck. Before then, Chloe collapsed on the mattress herself and then turned the knife on herself. And she drove the knife into her own neck before passing out. And in this moment, there was obviously a lot of commotion. Brian and the others could hear something going on in this room. And Brian ran to the bedroom. He tried to kick the door down, but obviously it was locked. And when he eventually broke the door down, it was too late because baby Hannah was already covered in blood. Chloe had a severe stab wound to her neck. And this is when Brian let out a blood-curdling scream. Immediately, Jason and the other two wives ran into the bedroom. Brian began tending to Hannah, and it is reported that baby Hannah was making a gurgling sound, struggling to breathe. But she was still alive, so Brian was really hoping that he was going to be able to save baby Hannah. Jessica then calls 911, and on the call, she is absolutely frantic. She says on the call, "I think a baby has just died. I don't believe she's breathing. She has a slit across her throat." Emergency services are dispatched straight away, and Jason ran over to Chloe to try and tend to her wounds and try to save her life. Now, Chloe had passed out, but she was kind of coming in and out of consciousness, and she could see Jason. He was applying pressure to her wound in her neck, and Chloe just kept saying, "Stop it, I'm supposed to die. I am not supposed to make it." Emergency services arrive very quickly, and they go straight to baby Hannah. They put her in the ambulance, and they rush her straight to hospital. And in the emergency room, the doctors do absolutely everything in their power to save this little baby girl. They perform CPR. They are trying everything to get her heart beating again. But Hannah's wounds were just too severe. One of the stab wounds had gone straight through her spine. She had lost a significant amount of blood. And sadly, it was too late. There was absolutely nothing anyone could do. And at 3:10 p.m., baby Hannah Nicole Driver was pronounced dead. And honestly, I'm lost for words. She was only 13 months old. She is so small, so defenseless. Just to think about the fact that she lost her life in such a brutal, vicious attack from her own mother. It is just truly, truly heartbreaking. And at the same time as all of that was going on, Chloe was also rushed to hospital. And it turns out doctors were able to save Chloe's life. So Chloe survived and Hannah didn't. And you can see photos of Chloe, and she has a huge plaster over her neck because of her wounds. And in the days that followed, police obviously went to Chloe to interview her about what had happened, but because her injuries were so bad, she actually couldn't speak. So she had to write down everything for the police. And Chloe was writing things down to the officers like, "I want to see my baby ASAP. I want to know who she's staying with." And this is when the officers had to inform Chloe that her baby hadn't survived. The officers also got Chloe to communicate with Brian over the phone, and they were really hoping to learn as much as possible about what happened here and what led up to this. And you can see footage of all of this online.
Yeah, you're on speaker. You've always had a choice. I don't know why you felt like you had a choice. Why did you feel like you had a choice? Because I couldn't handle being with the group anymore.
And when asked if Brian had caused these injuries, Chloe wrote down, "He didn't do it, I did. I was going insane and I only wanted my baby and husband, but he refused. It felt safest. I did it because I had no choice." So after this interview and after Chloe had recovered from her injuries, she was held in custody awaiting trial. However, did Chloe use this time in jail to distance herself from her so-called husband Brian, the husband that she was so desperate to escape? No. Now, she was given a phone line where she was allowed to contact her mom, but she used this phone line to actually contact her so-called husband, Brian. However, she was banned from contacting Brian. So the prison, when they found out, they blocked this number. But then Chloe started using another inmate's PIN to contact Brian anyway. Chloe was doing everything in her power when she was in jail to contact Brian as many times as possible. She was so desperate to talk to him. Now, I'm not sure if that has something to do with the coercive control and the abusive relationship that she was in, or did she actually just want to talk to Brian? Maybe this is what she wanted. But on these phone calls, Brian was still being incredibly creepy, controlling, manipulative. He actually was starting to force Chloe into calling him daddy. He also forced Chloe to continue drinking her own urine in jail, which Chloe did. She didn't want to because she was actually embarrassed in front of the other inmates, which of course she would be, but she still did it. Even though Brian would actually never know if she did it or not, she still did it. Brian also told Chloe that she was forbidden from saying anything bad about him during the court proceedings and the trial. And whilst in jail, Chloe made a total number of 6 100 phone calls to Brian. And the whole time she was making out that she was having zero contact with him, when she never stopped. So whilst Chloe is behind bars awaiting trial, what's happening with Brian? Absolutely nothing. No charges were brought against Brian at all. He was not arrested. He was still out living his best life with his 2 wives. And like I said, you can see his Instagram, it's public, and you can see that he was just continuing on living his life, his nomadic lifestyle with his 2 wives. And you can also see on his Instagram that he also managed to get his other 2 wives pregnant. And I'm talking very recently, he's only just had babies with his wives like last year. So he got his dream, didn't he? He has had multiple babies with multiple wives. And then when it comes to Jason, the incredibly misogynistic follower sidekick to Brian, the one that was cyber stalking and harassing multiple women online, well, what has happened to him? Well, it turns out that all of his harassment and stalking and threatening girls online finally caught up to him. After years of the police not taking these threats seriously, the police finally decided, maybe this is something that we should look into. And at this point, the threat against the college girls and their families were becoming more and more extreme as time was going on. He knew their locations, he knew their routines, he told them that he had weapons. He was telling them specific dates that he was going to turn up to assault them or possibly kill them. And he said that he was going to kidnap one of the girls and torture her. And he actually did turn up to their houses. He slashed their tires. He spray painted their car. So police finally took the threat seriously. They put out an arrest warrant for him. Jason went on the run. The public were warned that he was dangerous and possibly armed. And then he was finally tracked down, arrested, and put behind bars. So after years of Jason threatening multiple women online, threatening to kill them, harm them, sexually assault them, it finally caught up to him and he's finally going to face justice. So then finally, it's now Chloe Driver's trial. And this happened in November of 2024. So literally just a couple of weeks ago. She was charged with felony murder, cruelty to children in the first degree, and aggravated assault. And throughout the whole trial, there was no doubt that Chloe had committed these crimes. However, the question remained was she sane of mind at the time of committing these crimes? So was Chloe going to be found not guilty by reason of insanity? And this is what the defense really pushed for. The defense said that Chloe had suffered from a complete breakdown and that she was unable to justify between right and wrong. And that's what you need to prove if you're going to prove the defense of insanity. The prosecution and the defense, they had completely different narratives. The prosecution said that Chloe was malicious and that she committed this murder to have her husband completely to herself. However, her defense said that this narrative completely defied logic, because if Chloe really wanted her husband to herself, surely she would have killed the other 2 wives as well. Instead, the defense said that Chloe saw no way out of the abusive relationship that she was in, and in her mind at the time, she thought that the safest thing for herself and her baby was to no longer live. And throughout the whole trial, various witnesses came forward to try and determine which narrative was true. And one of the witnesses was Jason, of all people, in his orange jumpsuit, because he's in jail for stalking and harassing women online. So it's not like he's a very reliable witness, is it? And just listening to him on the stand, made my blood boil. I hate him so much.
And Z is the head of his house.
Is that biblically based or what?
No, it's psychologically sound.
Okay.
It's like, men are better leaders. They're better decision makers. They can regulate their emotions in a way that women cannot. And they're just, they're better.
Gabriella also appeared on the stand to give evidence of her abusive relationship with Brian.
And he had took duct tape and duct taped my entire torso to where I couldn't really breathe very well. And he had just started beating my face really bad.
And I feel so sorry for Gabriella, because Brian was harassing her for years after she gave birth. And now that this has all come to light, I just really hope that Gabriella finds peace and finds closure and gets support, because she deserves the world. And the trial lasted 6 days, and I was watching as much as I could as it was going on, and I'm sure some of you were also watching it as well. And in the end, Chloe's defense of insanity failed, and instead she was found guilty but mentally ill. And this means that the jury found Chloe criminally responsible for her actions. That yes, she was suffering with her mental health. However, at the time of the murder, she still knew what she was doing was wrong, and she did it anyway. And that means that Chloe is likely to be sentenced to a very long prison sentence, and she hasn't actually been sentenced yet. Her sentencing is on December 12th, unless it gets moved, but considering the charges that she has now been found guilty of, I would not be surprised if she is facing life in prison. And I do have some good news at the end of this case, because in the middle of this trial, like literally only a week ago, Brian was arrested. And I don't know what he was arrested for. There is no details right now anyway that have been released online. It's obviously too early to say. All that I could find online was that he was being charged as being a fugitive from justice. And that's all I know. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that develops. And I wonder if any more charges will be brought against Brian, because he deserves it. Like, he deserves to be in prison just as much as anyone else. And this case is just tragic beyond words. And it is so devastating to think about little baby Hannah and the world that she was born into, and just what she had to go through in her life, but then in her final moments. And I just want to end this video remembering her. Hannah Nicole Driver was a sweet, cheerful, and adorable young girl. She was loved by the few people who were able to interact with her, and she had so much life left ahead of her. She could have done anything in life, and she was taken far, far too soon. She was only 13 months old. So that brings us to the end of today's case. As always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.